Hello, everyone. It is now 2 p.m. Eastern Time and 11 o'clock Pacific Time. Welcome to the Packet Hacking Village Talks. And up next, we have a very, very, very special talk by MITRE. It's going to be an introduction to the MITRE Engage framework. It's a framework for adversary engagement operations. It's a talk by three friends, three people I actually know, Maretta Morovitz, Stan Barr, and Gabby Raymond. Some of you may know that MITRE is also responsible to maintain and manage CVE, CWE, ATT&CK, and now it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you Maretta, Stan, and Gabby, where they'll talk about MITRE Engage.
Welcome to our Wall of Sheep talk. Using file and network monitoring for detection is a powerful tool for increasing your cybersecurity posture. In this talk, we will present MITRE Engage, a framework for adversary engagement operations. Today's presenters include Dr. Stan Barr, the Capability Area Lead for Deception and Adversary Engagement at MITRE, me, Gabby Raymond, the Co-Capability Area Lead for Deception and Adversary Engagement, and Maretta Morovitz, a senior cybersecurity engineer and overall rock star. Shout out to our team back at MITRE, who has been supporting all of the work we are presenting today. And now for a little bit about our employer. MITRE is a not-for-profit organization that works in the public interest. We are innovators who solve hard problems in support of government, industry, and academia. Our team has over 10 years of experience in adversary engagement, and we draw from a wide variety of different backgrounds. We're proud to say that this talk does indeed represent the views of our employer. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Stan to frame some context around adversary engagement.
And now we want to talk about why we're here. We're here to discuss MITRE Engage. Engage builds on the work that SHIELD started and attempts to address a lot of the feedback that we received. Engage is still currently in beta, and we're shaking out some features and smoothing out some rough spots. We hope at the end of this talk that we can get your feedback on how to maximize its value. The first thing you should know about Engage is that we took and refined the SHIELD knowledge base into an adversary engagement framework. The framework is designed to help you think about how you can do operations. It's informed by real APT behaviors, and it's intended to drive defenders towards strategic goals. We want to help you be able to plan ideas to answer your gaps, run operations to collect the data, and best understand what happened during those operations and how to use it and bring that to bear on your corporate networks. If you're at DEF CON, watch MITRE Engage on LinkedIn for meetup information. Some 2,500 years ago, Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu said, "If you know the enemy and you know yourself, you need not fear the result of 100 battles." Our goal is to give you a framework such that you can be better prepared in your organizations to safely learn about your threats. For 30 plus years, we have been taught about defense in depth. We've been taught that we try and stop them at the perimeter, we'll try and stop them at the host, and we'll try and stop them at the application. What we have learned is that while defense in depth is a necessary portion of our cyber strategy, it is not a sufficient strategy for cybersecurity. To get to sufficiency, we propose thinking about cyber as a dam. Right? So there's an endless stream of badness out there that is always coming at us. The idea of defense in depth is to stop what you can. And as I said earlier, we've determined that the APT will always find a way through. What we've seen as of late, as 0 days become harder to find, that our adversary will follow a path of least resistance. Why bother trying to use an expensive 0 day when a server misconfiguration or a 1 day is already available? So they follow this path of least resistance. We believe that controlled access is the key. If you give them the breadcrumbs, if you give them a vulnerability to exploit on a machine that has no real data, that is disconnected from a production asset. And when they touch that machine and they use those credentials and they move to that point, that you can control them, that you can see what they do next, that is a model and an idea that we can use in cyber defense, right? We channel them away from important things, channel them towards things where you can control, where you have the advantage. And that moves us from that reactive defense in depth towards a more proactive approach where we can respond to them in our own way. In summary of this necessity and sufficiency criteria for cyber defense, let's just lay this out here on the continuum, right? So what we want to do is we'd like to move from reactive and relying on luck and being more proactive and relying on skill. And so if you look at these ideas, we have these classic ideas of denial, firewalls, antivirus, and the like. Then we move up to what was started to be pioneered in the 2000s, which is passive deception and honeypots. As we move up that scale and we're getting towards up and to the right, we have this idea of active deception. These are the things that the vendors are providing now. The idea of breadcrumbs and fake or pseudo vulnerabilities that allow you to be alerted when they're accessed. And these active deceptions allow you to detect and impact adversaries when they operate on your network. And moving a little farther and up into the right, where MITRE is sort of leveraging and focusing, is trying to be on this adversary engagement. How do we use deception and how do we use all these things to provide APT a chance to do their operations in a way that's safe for us? And that's how we plan on learning about adversaries. We exclude the whole idea of hackback. We think that's a radioactive topic area, and we want to focus on how do we do adversary engagement, how do we use denial, how do we use deception to actually engage with our adversaries and learn about them.
Before we get into the MITRE Engage framework, I want to outline how MITRE is invested in this field. We have 4 overarching goals that drive our research. We actively engage in conversations with the vendor community to support the vendor-based ecosystem. Our role at MITRE is to act as a service organization. We do gratis work that enables public discourse on the subject of deception. We research and develop tools to improve how we conduct operations and share this with others to advance the state of the art in operations. We also collaborate with external partners to improve their ability to run operations. By sharing our tools, knowledge, and methodologies across the community, we promote foundational adversary engagement. These 4 goals support our overarching vision for the future: denial, deception, and adversary engagement as a pillar of defensive cyber strategy across the United States and our allies. And for some motivation on why we think this is important, prior to 2008, MITRE struggled with our APT response. We spent too much time on indicators from others with varying relevance to us. We found it difficult to discover much on our production network. We had little to no information on post-compromise TTPs and had few options for incident response. We put a lot of effort into changing the game. The next few slides build to show what we learned over multiple operations for 9 actor sets. Before kicking off these operations, we had a basic level of indicators of compromise as initial intelligence about these different threat actors. Through running these adversary engagement operations, our first intelligence return was a set of additional IOCs. We learned a significant amount more than the intelligence we had originally. In addition to those IOCs, we also captured files that the adversary dropped, and improved our posture through the development of additional signatures. Lastly, we developed protocol decoders as a result of reverse engineering malware or looking at the network traffic. Overall, there is a significant value proposition for adversary engagement through the return of intelligence gained from these operations.
While we've had a lot of successes, it's important to note that these operations can have pitfalls, and we have had our share of failures. So let me stress that every operation should be run in a safe environment where you remove the risk of contaminating your production assets wherever and however possible. Here are some of the common failures that we've experienced. We've run plenty of operations where the malware never connected to the C2. We've run operations where the C2 never pushed us any interesting nuggets. Or the first thing they did was check for something that wasn't what they expected and they bugged out never to return. This last example can be really instructive on what you have to do to get an operation to run correctly. And we've had operations where people have done some poor tradecraft, left the malware on a thumb drive in a computer, the adversary found it and was most disapproving of that. And so even those operations can teach you a lot about what happens and what can happen when you interact with an APT. And these type of things have informed how we put together our planning tool.
Through MITRE's 10 plus years of operational experience, both the good and the bad, we recognized we had an opportunity to build off of our lessons learned and share that knowledge with the wider community. So MITRE sat down and drafted SHIELD, a knowledge base developed to capture and organize our operational knowledge about active defense and adversary engagement. SHIELD was released in the fall of 2020, and since its release and public reception, we've looked for opportunities to refine it. Engage is the next iteration on SHIELD. We've moved away from the term active defense to focus only on adversary engagement. Rather than a knowledge base, we're using Engage as a framework for planning and communicating adversary engagement activities. Okay, I'm sure that by this point everyone has had plenty of the background details. So next, Maretta is going to get into the actual important details of Engage.
As Stan and Gabby have described, a lot of people have dedicated a lot of time and energy to get us to where we are today. And we think we have the beginnings of a really powerful tool. But we also know that we have a long way to go. We're releasing MITRE Engage today as a beta. With full transparency, we know it's not perfect. We know it's a little rough around the edges. But we wanted to start to have a dialogue with the community so that we can shape and build this tool in a way that is useful and a reflection of the collective expertise of the community. So please, if you hear something you like, email us. You hear something that sounds crazy? Email us. You want to offer thoughts on future directions or be part of future collaboration? Email us. And with that, let's jump in. Before we dive into the full framework, it's important to understand these three concepts of MITRE Engage, and those are goals, approaches, and activities. We use these three bins in order to separate the various components of our framework. Goals are the big objectives you'd like to accomplish. Approaches are what let you make progress towards those goals. And activities are the concrete techniques you use to accomplish a given approach. Now you're looking at the entire Engage framework. There's a lot going on here, so let's break it down a little. Across the top are our goals. Prepare, expose, affect, elicit, understand. The next row down, these are our approaches: planning, collection, detection, prevention, direction, disruption, reassurance, motivation, and analysis. And the remaining information, these are our activities. You'll notice that these columns are broken into two components. On either end are our strategic actions. These are the things that you as the defender do to build and inform your own strategic planning. I prepare for my operation. I understand the results of my operation. In the center, these are the engagement actions. These are the activities you will take against your adversary. I want to expose my adversary. I want to affect my adversary. I want to elicit from my adversary. These are the activities that you might more quickly associate with denial, deception, and adversary engagement. Things like decoy articles and systems, detonate malware, and network monitoring, just to name a few. However, one of the key aspects of MITRE Engage is that these engagement activities can't be viewed without the context that our strategic goals, approaches, and activities provide. There are a lot of effective defensive technologies that are basically fire and forget. Think AV. You can add it to your system and it is highly effective at identifying the bad stuff without needing a lot of operational planning or really understanding how it fits into a larger cyber defensive strategy. We are strong believers that denial, deception, and adversary engagement can only be used effectively when it is driven by careful planning and informed by robust analysis. The Engage framework bookends all of the various engagement actions with activities that develop and mature this preparation and ultimate understanding. It forces the defender to view their engagement actions from the context of a larger strategy. Now, let's take some time to dive into each of these various components and understand them in a little bit more detail. First, let's take a look at our strategic goals, approaches, and activities, the things that we do to support our operational strategy. These are our bookends, those key activities that we undertake in order to ground and center our operation in the strategic context. This is what provides that planning and analysis element to our operations that allows us to input all of the various data sources that we have, use those to inform and drive our operation, and then take the output, that raw data that we get out of our operation, distill that to intelligence, and feed that back in to inform the operations of today, but also our operations of tomorrow. Now we have our engagement goals, approaches, and activities. These are the actions you can take that are driven by observed adversary behavior. As the adversary operates, each action they take has the potential to introduce a vulnerability that is exploitable by the defender. We use ATT&CK as our knowledge base of observed adversary actions. For various techniques described in ATT&CK, we define the vulnerability that that particular action exposes, and then we create a mapping back to the corresponding engagement activity that can be utilized by the defender to capitalize on the adversary's weakness. Let's look at an example of one of these attack mappings. We're going to take the attack technique remote system discovery. This is when an adversary may attempt to get a listing of systems on the network that may be used for lateral movement from the current system. We've identified one specific vulnerability from this action. That is that when the adversary interacts with the environment or personas, they're vulnerable to collect, observe, or manipulate artifacts that may cause them to reveal behaviors, use additional or more advanced capabilities against the target, or impact their length of dwell time. We've also identified the engagement activity that we believe would be useful in exploiting this vulnerability, in this case, decoy artifacts and systems. Let's look at an example. Let's say we have an adversary that's doing remote system discovery on our network. We've set up a number of decoy artifacts that look like remote systems. As the adversary starts scanning, they find something of interest and decide to target that remote system. We've just been able to influence the adversary's actions and reveal additional TTPs or IOCs or other behaviors that maybe we didn't know about before. Or maybe we were able to successfully move the adversary away from a real remote system and towards our decoys. Either way, we've just shown how we can use an engagement activity, in this case, decoy artifacts and systems, to exploit an adversary vulnerability. Now let's dig into the specifics of our goals. And we'll start with our strategic goals. First, we have prepare. We prepare our strategy before we start any engagement by gathering together all of the various pieces of information that are required so that we can focus and drive our operation to ensure that we are constantly aligned with our big strategic plan. This also helps us define exactly what that plan is so that we have a clear understanding and can maintain safety throughout our operation. On the other side of our framework, we have understand. This is where we bring together all of the various outputs and data from our op, whether that's raw data or just an assessment of our successes and failures, to build on our current understanding and inform our future activities. Here, the goal is to understand all of these various pieces of data and make sure that we're feeding that back in so that each time we run an operation, we're learning and maturing. Now we'll look at our 3 engagement goals. We'll start with expose. Expose is all about identifying adversaries operating on our networks or adversaries remotely attempting to gain access to our network assets. Affect. Affect is about negatively impacting the goals of our adversaries, either when they operate against our assets or when we impact the decisions they take based on what we allow them to perceive. And finally, elicit. Elicit is when we convince our adversaries that they should reveal their TTPs, their tactics, techniques, and procedures, and demonstrate their interests, which allows us to learn more about them. Now we have our approaches, and these are the means by which we're going to make progress towards our strategic goals. You'll notice quickly that there are far fewer strategic approaches than there are engagement approaches. This is done intentionally in our first release of Engage, as we really want to highlight the importance of having succinct and clear strategic approaches that drive towards a set of strategic goals. We've picked the minimum subset that we feel are essential for every engagement operation. In time, it may make sense to build these out further, but for now, we really want our focus for the defender to be on these specific goals and approaches as a way to inform the rest of your activities. On the planning side, again, it's all about how do we prepare and plan for that operation that we intend to do. And on the right-hand side, it's all about doing the analysis that will build on our understanding. On the engagement approaches, we have collection and detection. And here it's important to make a distinction that we're not talking about collection and detection that's just good cyber practices and good cyber hygiene. Rather, we're specifically talking about the ways that we can use adversary engagement, denial, and deception in order to meet and move towards that goal of exposing adversaries on our network. So collecting, that's about getting data that we need from our environment about our adversary's movement, and detecting is really highlighting that movement as they go through the engagement environment. Under effect, we have prevention, direction, and disruption. Prevention, stopping our adversaries from doing the things they want to do. Direction, moving our adversaries in locations and paths that they might not otherwise take. And disruption, imposing a cost that causes our adversaries to not be able to do the things they want to do in the ways they want to do them. On the far right, under elicit, we have reassurance and motivation. Reassurance is all about convincing our adversaries that everything is good, that there's no reason to feel any amount of discomfort or suspicion about our environment. And motivation is all about encouraging our adversaries to display additional or more advanced or capabilities and techniques and tactics and procedures that they might not otherwise have displayed. Now we add in our activities. Activities are those concrete techniques you can use to accomplish an approach. I'm not going to go into the specifics about each of the activities for time's sake, but I do invite you to check out the website engage.mitre.org, or you can dig into our specific definitions and the various mappings for all of these activities. I do want to discuss a few notes about how we think about the activities. Firstly, you'll notice that we have significantly scoped down the activities we presented when compared to MITRE Shield. We did this for a couple of reasons. First, we've tightened our scope to only be around denial, deception, and adversary engagement activities. Second, we're trying to provide the language to communicate, plan, and analyze your operations. In this way, we don't want our activities to get too far into the technical weeds or require an understanding of technical subtleties across and between activities. Rather, we want to create a high-level collection of activities that can be used, whether you're technical or not, to describe a large range of actions. We hope this will allow our users to be able to articulate in language the various activities in support of planning, analysis, and communications. Additionally, we need something that our team is able to maintain and sustain, and we want MITRE Engage to be a community-driven tool for years to come. We do have some ideas and plans about how in the future we can dig into some of the more technical subtleties around given activities, but it's something we want to have the community help us move towards. Finally, you'll notice that when you look at this view of the framework, the repetition across the goals of the various activities, frankly, it can be a little distracting. While we have shown you this view of the framework to introduce you to the tool, this is not the view we intend a user to utilize all that often. Since Engage is goal-driven and really wants the user to focus on how you drive an operation with a specific goal in mind, users will only need to consider activities aligned to their strategic goal. Therefore, much of this repetition will disappear when you remove the noise of extraneous goals not pertinent to a given operation. In this way, the framework really helps you to focus down so that all of your actions are driven towards your strategic goals. The book seen here, The Art and Science of Military Deception, was contributed by one of the undisputed deans of U.S. denial and deception, Mr. Barton Whaley. And Barton Whaley really is the foremost authority on military denial and deception strategy and tactics. And what we have done is take his process of deception and apply and change that for what it means for adversary engagement, denial, and deception in the cyberspace. So what we're going to do now is look at how we can use MITRE Engage as a framework for denial, deception, and adversary engagement operations, influenced a lot by Barton Whaley's thinking in The Art and Science of Military Deception. And so with that, let's walk through an example of how we can use MITRE Engage. A quick note before we begin that this is a fictional and at times a little overly simplified example of how to illustrate the ways the Engage framework can be used to plan and discuss an engagement operation. In the future, we really hope to release blog posts, videos, and conversations with the community where we're able to dive into some of the more technical meatiness or operational intricacies of a real-life operation. But this is just meant as a tool to help see how Engage can be applied in an operational scenario. Just a little bit of background information so we can orient ourselves to the slides we're going to see. At the top of each slide, you'll see Step X. This shows where we are within the process of adversary engagement. Next, you'll see some kind of graphic in the middle. This is just supposed to be a visual representation of whatever event we're describing currently in the story. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a column or columns from Engage. This is supposed to highlight which part of the framework we're focusing on and how it's being applied to our story. Oftentimes, one or more activities from within the chosen column will be highlighted. This is the activity that is currently the focus of whatever discussion we're having. And without further ado, let's jump into our story. Welcome to the FUBAR Corp. FUBAR Corp is a medium-sized high-tech business. The FUBAR Corp has a robust security team. However, they've been targeted by APT-1337 in the past. This is a pretty sophisticated actor, and FUBAR Corp is terrified that they haven't been able to fully remove the threat from their network. The company's CISO, Cassie, is ready to get creative in her mission to identify and rid this threat from the network. So let's meet our team. We have Cassie, the CISO, Sam, the sysadmin, Maria, the malware analyst, Ian, the InfoSec engineer, and Tim, the threat analyst. Cassie has gathered her team, and they're brainstorming new and innovative ways to approach their corporate security. They've heard about deception and deception technologies and adversary engagement in the past, but haven't really ever been able to find ways to actually apply this or understand how they can apply this to their networks. And they've just heard about this thing called MITRE Engage, and it does seem like it would give them a framework to be able to sort of apply this concept of denial, deception, and adversary engagement to their actual security strategy. So they're willing to give this a shot. Step 0. Assess knowledge of your adversaries and your organization. Cassie, the CISO, meets with the other executives to conduct a crown jewel analysis. They're going to do this to identify the cyber assets that are most critical to accomplish FUBAR Corp's mission. Maria, the malware analyst, and Tim, the threat analyst, work together to look at the current and historical targeting for their organization as well as other organizations in the sector. They're going to do this so that they can build a threat model of APT-1337. Meanwhile, Anne, the InfoSec engineer, and Sam, the sysadmin, conduct a thorough assessment of the current defenses and security protocols. When the teams rejoin, they feel like they have a pretty good understanding of both the threat landscape and their current security strengths and weaknesses. Step 1. Determine your strategic goal. Now that the team is back together, they're going to look at all of the information they gathered, and everyone agrees that exposing any remaining adversaries that exist in their network really has to be their main strategic goal. There's just such a high financial risk of any additional IP theft that exposing adversaries has to be their first priority. This goal is going to drive and focus every decision that the team makes going forward. Step 2. Determine what you want your adversary to do. The team looks at each of the attack techniques associated with APT-1337 in their threat model. They use these techniques to understand the vulnerabilities that their adversaries' actions expose. Using the Engage Planning tool, they can select a number of engagement activities that directly map to APT-1337 and serve to drive progress towards their chosen strategic goal, to expose the adversary. In this case, APT-1337 has been observed targeting intellectual property and network shares using stolen credentials. The team understands that the adversary is vulnerable to revealing the extent of their compromise when they utilize credentials found in one area of the network to access a different area of the network. Additionally, whenever the adversary is touching network resources, they realize that they are vulnerable to exposure, whether it's in logs or tripwires or some other high-fidelity alert that can be triggered whenever an adversary touches a specific network resource. Using all of this information, the team begins to storyboard how they would like the op to proceed. Again, keeping that strategic goal of exposing the adversary in mind, the team creates a storyboard of events that would force the currently hidden adversary to take actions that would expose their presence on the network. The teams decided to select 4 engagement activities to start: network monitoring and system activity monitoring, network analysis, and decoy articles and systems. They believe that these activities will drive progress to collect and detect on the adversary and to ultimately achieve their goal of exposing the adversary. Step 3. Determine what you want your adversary to perceive. Now that the team has a rough storyboard of what they'd like the adversary to do, they can add to their planning by creating the personas and story elements required to control what is communicated to the adversary. It's important that the team understands that they can't control what the adversary thinks, and trying to think like the adversary can lead you into some dangerous situations, especially if you're not intimately familiar with your adversary. Remember, adversaries have different perspectives, different goals, different cultures than the defenders, and so it's really hard to ever truly say you can think like your adversary or anticipate what your adversary is going to think. However, they can use their developed threat model, strategic goals, storyboard, and understanding of the adversary to shape what the adversary will find in the environment. This planning will help the team craft both the decoy articles and the engagement environment itself. So, armed with their previous planning, the team is ready to exploit the opportunities presented by APT-1337's past activities. Now the team can begin to consider the facts and fictions that will be revealed and concealed to impact how the adversary will perceive the environment. The team starts with non-essential information. This is their facts that are revealed to the adversary. The team decides that the decoy network shares should use the same infrastructure, naming conventions, file paths, and all of the other things that make them look just like legitimate network shares because they really are legitimate network shares in the environment. Next, they'll focus on the essential information. These are the facts that are concealed. the team decides that they're going to hide their monitoring to ensure stealthy collection on the adversary. Next are essential disinformation. These are the fictions that are revealed to the adversary. The team decides to include a number of decoy documents that appear to contain valuable corporate secrets, but in truth impose no risk to the corporation because either they're old versions of documents, they're already publicly released, really, they just contain no sensitive or intellectual property. And finally, for non-disclosable fictions, the team chooses to include some large encrypted files in the network share that the adversaries won't have the keys to. These are intended just to fill up the shares and make it look like there's more content and more interesting content than actually exists, to encourage the adversaries to believe the deception story that's being told. Step 4. Determine presentation avenues for your adversary. Now that the team has determined what they want their adversary to do and what they want them to perceive, it's time to think about how they actually want to present things to the adversary. They go back to the 4 chosen engagement activities: network monitoring, system activity monitoring, network analysis, and decoy articles and systems. Only the decoy articles and systems should actually be presented to the adversary. The rest of it is stealthy and will be concealed so that the adversary doesn't know that the monitoring and analysis is taking place. The team knows that the adversary often targets password-protected network shares using credentials stolen from elsewhere in the network. Therefore, they decide that they're going to set up a series of decoy articles in the form of network shares and fake credentials. The fake credentials will be sprinkled across the production environment. If the adversary attempts to access one of these shares or to use a decoy credential, Ian, the InfoSec engineer, will receive a high-fidelity alert, since we know that legitimate users won't be accessing these shares or using these credentials. Additionally, the team decides that they're going to fill the network shares with decoy documents that will alert Ian if they are touched or opened by the adversary. Ian and Sam, the sysadmin, work together to identify how to deploy their monitoring solution and where and how to collect all the logs and network data they need to engage in those activities stealthily. The team hopes that by presenting the adversary with decoy articles that will elicit a specific behavior, in this case, targeting the network share to steal information, that the defenders will be able to identify previously unknown compromised hosts on their system and be able to expose the adversary in their network. Step 5. Set up the success and exit criteria. Now that the storyboard and engagement environment have been established, the team meets again to determine the key decision points for the operation. These decision points are critical to ensure safety during the operation and to maintain timeliness in the decision-making process. The team decides that they'll consider the operation a success if they're able to detect ATT-CK lateral movement. The team determines that they'll leave the decoy systems in place unless the adversary begins to use those systems to make lateral movement across or out of the network. Additionally, the team determines a maximum amount of time that they'll leave the decoy articles in place with no engagement. If this amount of time is exceeded, then they'll pause and reassess the operation. Sysadmin Sam and InfoSec engineer Ian can use these success and exit criteria to drive their monitoring and analytics of the environment. They need to make sure that they have visibility into all of the different points that would be considered crossing one of our exit criteria. Step 6. Execute your operation. At this point, the team executes the operation. Ian, the InfoSec engineer, and Sam, the sysadmin, deploy the engagement environment, monitoring, and analytics. Maria, the malware analyst, and Tim, the threat analyst, keep close tabs on any new information on APT-1337 that might require the team to pause and assess the operation. A prime example of this would be if APT-1337 starts demonstrating new TTPs that the current monitoring solution would not detect. This piece of information would be vital for Ian and Sam to have good situational awareness. And now they wait. One day, a few months later, InfoSec engineer Ian wakes up at 3 a.m. to his cell phone ringing. One of the monitoring capabilities has detected access to a network share in the engagement environment using a decoy credential. The same host that accessed the network share also begins exfilling data to an unknown IP. Step 7. Turn raw data into actionable intelligence. Ian and his team begin to review the logs and PCAP data that they were collecting. They can use this data to identify the compromised host, triage the situation, and perform instant response. They're able to assess with high confidence that this activity is the result of APT-1337. The InfoSec team turns off the host. Step 8. Feedback intelligence. Ian immediately adds the new IOC, the IP address that the data was being exfilled to his filtering rules, and suspends the engagement operation by turning off all of the decoy systems on the network. With immediate incident response completed, he will now rejoin with the team to assess the operation and determine what to do next. Step 9. Analyze your successes and failures. The entire team meets to discuss the operation. The team decides to clean the infected host, rather than to move this host to a segregated engagement environment to continue the operation, this time with the goals of eliciting additional TTPs. They know that this could be an opportunity for a second operation, but they don't feel like they have the resources to safely maintain both, and exposing additional adversaries still remaining on their network really is their top priority. Therefore, the team chooses to clean the infected host. Since they've already evicted the adversary from a large portion of the network back when the initial intrusion happened, they determined that this new cleanup action will be unlikely to arouse the adversary's suspicion that deception technologies were suddenly being used. And if it does, and the adversaries become aware of the deception, and they choose to bug out or slow down further attacks, well then FUBAR Corp will still consider the operation to be a success. Sysadmin Sam and InfoSec engineer Ian work to incorporate the new IOC into their existing defenses. Malware analyst Maria and threat analyst Tim work together to update their threat model for APT-1337 to include any actions observed during this engagement. Additionally, the whole team evaluates their methods of communication before and during the operation. The hotwash has illuminated not only what went well or poorly in the op itself, but also what went well or poorly across the team, which can be vital to future operational success. Now that we've gone through the whole process, let's take a step back and look at how this fits into the Engage framework at a higher level. We can see that if we build a solid foundation of understanding of our adversaries and understanding of ourselves and our own organization, we can take each of the steps that we saw and fit it neatly into our strategic goals to prepare and understand, or one of our engagement goals to drive our actual operation. The steps pre-operation showcase how we can use our planning activities to shape and drive the engagement, while our steps post-operation show how we can turn raw data into intelligence to inform and guide our actions tomorrow. In this way, these steps allow us to rinse, wash, and repeat as we build denial, deception, and adversary engagement into a core component of our cyber strategies. On behalf of all of us who presented today, as well as our amazing team back at MITRE, we'd like to say a huge thank you to everyone who gave us their time and attention today. We are really excited to be able to release MITRE Engage to the community, and even more excited to see where we can take this in the future. So please come check us out at engage.mitre.org, where you can dig into all of the various definitions and components that we talked about today. We'd love to hear from you, and we really mean that, so please email us at engage@mitre.org and check us out on LinkedIn at MITRE Engage. That's where we'll be posting any new blog posts that we come up with or events that we might be hosting in the future. Again, thank you so much for your time and attention today. We're excited to see where we can take this in the future, so please come engage with MITRE.
Thank you so much, Moretta, Stan, and Gabby. Thank you so much. Um, Very grateful to have MITRE this year at the Packet Hacking Village. Um, Thank you. Thank you so much. So before, in closing, one very important note. If you have, just a friendly reminder, if you have any questions to the team, go to send question to engage@mitre.org. That is engage, ENGAGE at mitre.org. Thank you. So what we're gonna do is we have one more talk for the day. We have one more talk for the day. It's going to be coming up at noontime Pacific time, 3 p.m. Eastern time. So the talk will be seeing through the windows, centralized Windows log for greater visibility by Matt Gracie. So Matt presentation on Windows logs are coming up, and that is it for talks for today. So we have 4 talks today and 4 talks tomorrow, starting at 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time, 12 p.m. Eastern time. So how we're doing the Packet Hacking Village this year is 4 talks virtual in the morning, and then the whole afternoon is going to be physical at the Packet Hacking Village at DEFCON at Paris. Same thing with tomorrow. 4 talks in the morning, virtual, and then the entire afternoon is going to be in person, physical. So, yeah. So, yeah. Wait a minute. How come this is. There we go. I just need to go and modify this. There you go. Sweet. So at noon, we're going to have a final talk tip for today. Also, all the talks are going to be posted on YouTube. All the talks are actually going to be saved and stored on YouTube. Cool. All right. See you back in like almost 15 minutes. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It is now noontime. It is now noontime in Las Vegas. It is also now 3 p.m. on the Eastern time zone. First of all, I want to thank everyone for joining us for the morning, early afternoon sessions virtually. Our next and final talk of today is going to be Seeing Through the Windows, Centralized Windows Logs for Greater Visibility by Matt Gracie. So, take it away, Matt.
Hello and welcome. This talk is called Seeing Through the Windows, Centralizing Windows Logs for Greater Visibility. Let's get started. My name's Matt Gracie. I'm a senior engineer on the professional services team at Security Onion Solutions. Before that, I spent about 15 years as a blue teamer, working to defend networks in higher education, manufacturing, financial services, and healthcare. Today I'm going to be talking about logging functionality that's built into the Windows operating system. There's a lot of neat features in there for the blue team in order to get better visibility into what's happening on the network. And in addition to the built-in features in Windows itself, there's a lot of other free tooling that can be leveraged to help enhance that visibility. We're going to walk through some of these possibilities, talk about some of the software that's available that's out there, and then I'll do a short demonstration of a potential investigation using the open source Elastic platform. So, why do we want to centralize our Windows logs anyway? Well, this is the best graphic I've found to explain why it's such a great idea. An attacker's view of our network is a lot like the attacker's view of a castle. They have a wide-ranging view and they can see all of the various entry and exit points and weaknesses. They can really sort of run roughshod over the whole structure. Meanwhile, a defender's view is a single arrow slit. They're looking out at the attacker, hoping that they can defend their little portion, but they don't really have a holistic view of the entire landscape. What we want to do with log centralization is build something that looks more like this, a panopticon, someplace where our defender can sit in that tower in the middle and see into everything that's going on in the network. If we're able to pull in logs from all of our different endpoints and get a look at them, that'll give us a lot better visibility into what's happening all around the network. We're no longer defending just that single arrow slit. We can see the whole fortress all at once. But why do we want to do endpoint logs specifically? Well, according to Fortinet, the current percentage of encrypted web traffic is about 85%, up from 55% in Q3 of 2017. What that means is a lot of the other traffic that we could monitor using tools like full packet capture or Zeek or something like that is going to be encrypted. We can get some metadata out of it, but we're not really going to see a lot of the really serious important stuff. Naturally, traffic needs to be decrypted when it gets to an endpoint, so if we can monitor endpoint logs, that gives us really good visibility into what's going on. So that's the emphasis of this talk. I'm not trying to say that network logs aren't important, but endpoint logs are more and more important than they used to be. In the old days, when all your web traffic was unencrypted, you could just monitor that and figure out what a machine was up to. But unfortunately, those days are long gone for the defender. So, how do we do it? How do we get a central repository set up to collect all of our Windows logs for analysis? Well, let's go back to the beginning. Windows event logs are a proprietary format that Microsoft uses to record system events. The classic places to put those events are in the application, setup, system, and security logs. Those have been part of Windows for a long time. Windows 2000 introduced per application log files. So if you installed an additional application or an additional service, it could write its logs in a special place just reserved for that one. Windows Vista rewrote everything using an XML event definition standard, so everything became sort of more easily digestible and more easily integratable into other systems. An important thing to remember about Windows event logs is that every event has a standard numeric event ID. If I look for event number 1102 in my Windows environment, that is going to mean the exact same thing on every Windows machine across my entire fleet. So that's very helpful for threat hunting or for building alerting when we want to see a particular event happening. For example, this is event 4802, which is a screensaver coming on in a Windows environment. You can see that the event includes the number 4802, the log name, security, the name of the account who invoked the screensaver, the domain in which it occurred, and some other metadata. Now this is sort of the graphical view that you get if you look at it in the event viewer. If you look at the underlying data, it's an XML payload, sort of like this, where everything is contained within its own tag. The nice thing about this format is that it makes it much easier to parse with a third-party application because everything is already identified as what sort of data it is. Channel, computer, data, target username, that sort of thing. So this whole structure is how Windows writes its logs. Every event generates a log. The log is written in an XML format like this into an event log on the local machine. So on an enterprise AD network, you can use Windows Event Forwarding to forward these events to a central location. This requires you to have a Windows server that acts as the subscription server and a GPO to tell the endpoints where to get that subscription information. This is a really easy way to centralize the logs in your Active Directory environment to all flow to a single subscription server for collection. So this is an example of a subscription. In this case, we're collecting event number 1102 from all subscribing computers. Those computers are designated in the Select Computer Groups button about halfway down the window there. The events to collect are defined in Select Events, and then when you hit OK, the subscription is created and it can be pushed out to participating computers. That push process is done via a GPO, a group policy object. So right here we see a very simple subscription. It says all computers should get their subscription information from sawmill.panopticon.local on port 5985 at that URI path. What that's going to do is tell all of the computers that are running WinRM to check in with that server, download their subscription information. And again, in the subscription, we've designated which computers it applies to. So we can have separate subscriptions for things like domain controllers or web servers or things in the DMZ than we do for ordinary workstations. But all of them will send their messages, their logs, to that same subscription server. So we'll just have one giant pile of XML log files on that subscription server. What it ends up looking like is something like this. Here we see an event ID 1102, which is the subscription example that we had a couple slides ago. It means that the audit log for security on the device was cleared. And you see this is the forwarded events log. That means these are events that came in from other endpoints on the network. The computer named member.panopticon.local exhibited a event ID 1102, a log clearing event on the security log. So the event was pushed over to our collector here. Now, one nice thing, and this is sort of a side note, when a log is cleared on a member computer like this, it does not clear the log in the subscription server. So you're setting up sort of a lockbox for all of these logs to go into to be maintained into the future. So a rogue admin can't wipe the logs in that remote location. So what are good events to monitor in an architecture like this? Well, the first one is the example that we used, your security event logs being cleared. You probably also want to monitor for high-value groups like domain admins being changed, for local administrator groups being changed, new accounts being added to local admin, that sort of thing. Local users being created or deleted. If you're using an Active Directory environment, odds are good that you really don't want your admins creating local accounts. You really want everything being done in the domain. So local accounts being created is sort of a red flag. New services being installed, especially on domain controllers. There are administrative tools like PS-exec, for example, that actually generate a new service record when they're run on an endpoint for the first time. So if you are collecting those logs from your endpoints, and you're collecting information about what new services are installed, you will see if somebody starts trying to use those for lateral movement or some sort of malicious behavior. These examples come from a paper called Monitoring What Matters by Jessica Payne. It's an excellent paper. There's a link to it at the end of the slides. Another good place to look for suggestions is this Spotting the Adversary with Windows Event Log Monitoring document. This is freely downloadable from the NSA. Again, there's a link at the end of the slide deck. They suggest looking for changes to scheduled tasks. Scheduled tasks will often be leveraged as a persistence mechanism by an attacker. So if a server suddenly starts getting new scheduled tasks that you don't recognize, it may be compromised and needs to be investigated. Excessive password resets, other software installations, anything that's installed using the MSI format will write to the event log, and those logs can be forwarded to your central location. Enabling of accounts, honey tokens. So if you create an account that is never intended to actually be used and just leave the credentials lying around on your network, if somebody tries to use them, that's a sign that something nefarious is probably going on. Legacy accounts that have been disabled, but you can still raise alerts on, or RDP logins. If people are connecting directly to servers when they're supposed to be going through a jump host or something similar, that can be an indicator of lateral movement or something else malicious going on. Now, if you want to move to the next level, then you want to look at Sysmon. Sysmon is a tool from Microsoft's sysinternals team that unlocks a deeper level of logging in your Windows environment. So if Sysmon is running, it will log things like process creations, or file creations, or DNS queries by individual applications. It gives you very good, high-fidelity, fine-grained log information about your endpoint. And because it's doing it all in the standard Windows Event Log format, you can also pick it up with Windows Event Forwarding and send it to your subscription server. Earlier I mentioned that Windows 2000 introduced application-specific logs. Sysmon writes everything to a Sysmon operational log on the endpoint. But again, it's just an XML construct that can be scooped up with the Windows Event Forwarding and sent off to a subscription server. Definitely worth taking a look at. When you install Sysmon, you really need to install it with a template, a configuration template, and that will tell Sysmon which functionality to turn on and which not to turn on, so that your logs aren't overwhelmed with false positives or chatty processes. One really good template is freely available from the Swift on Security GitHub repo. It's named Sysmon Config. It's regularly updated. It's definitely worth checking out, and it's the one that I'll be using in the demonstration later in this talk. So this is what a Sysmon event looks like. This is the paint.exe built-in accessory being launched on a Windows server. So you can see it catches the current directory, the user who launched it, the command line, the hash of the executable, whether it's signed or not, if it makes DNS requests, information about the parent process and the parent PID. All of this stuff is written to the log and can then be forwarded off to a subscription server or another destination. On the back end, again, it's all XML based, so when this stuff goes to the subscription server or to Elasticsearch or to whatever the final destination is, it's packaged up and ready to be parsed and processed. Now, another option is PowerShell logging. PowerShell is a very powerful tool that is used both by administrators and by adversaries in the network. So it's probably a good idea to turn on PowerShell logging. There are several different varieties of PowerShell logging. One of the best ones to turn on is PowerShell script block logging. What that will do is it will record every PowerShell command issued on an endpoint to an event log file. And again, this is an application-specific event log. I think it's just called PowerShell operational. It can be enabled via a GPO, or if you're in a non-domain environment, it can be enabled via a registry key. So this is very helpful for monitoring what PowerShell is doing on your endpoints. If you're in an environment where admins use PowerShell a lot, this logging may turn out to be very chatty for you. But if you are in many environments, then a big burst of PowerShell showing up on an endpoint is suspicious and merits further investigation. Once you have the logs all in one place, there's several different freely available Windows tools that you can use to analyze them. The most basic tool is Event Viewer, which is the log viewer that's built into Windows. All of the stuff that's forwarded into the subscription server is just written into the forwarded logs event log. So you can look for it in Event Viewer, and there's some basic functionality there for searching for strings or jumping to the next match, that sort of thing. But it's really a pretty rudimentary tool. You don't want to be doing a lot of analytic work with Event Viewer. It's adequate for checking if something is there or not, but for doing data analysis and trying to spot larger trends, it's really very cumbersome. One possible candidate for the analysis piece is using Log Parser or Log Parser Studio. That's a download from Microsoft that lets you execute SQL-style commands against those XML files storing event data. So you can do a select from all my logs where the event ID equals X if you're looking for something in particular. And it will generate a CSV file or some other output with all of the stuff that matches your query. So if you want to build a report that spits out all of the software installation events or all of the new service installation events on your network over the course of the last 24 hours, it's very easy to do with Log Parser. Log Parser itself is a command line utility. Log Parser Studio is more of an IDE, more of a graphical utility for crafting those queries. So if you have a SQL background, it's very easy to pick up. It's a very powerful tool for building static queries against your event logs. If you want to do visualization, then the Power BI desktop from the Business Intelligence Toolkit might be helpful. You can even take the CSV files that are generated in Log Parser and push them over to Power BI desktop to make them into graphs and trend lines and all sorts of other graphical stuff. So it's a good set of tools. These are all free downloads from Microsoft's site. If you'd rather analyze them somewhere else, there's a lot of options for moving them into another analysis platform. NXLog is by the makers of syslog-ng. It's a free download, and it allows you to convert your event logs into syslogs and send them elsewhere. So if you have a SIM, for example, that digests syslog, NXLog might be a good choice for feeding your event log data into that. OSEC or Wazoo, which is a fork of OSEC, is a host-based IDS. It can be used to ship logs. It can also be used as an alerting mechanism. So if there's something in particular in those logs that you want to search for, you can write an OSEC rule that will raise an alert and spot it. Finally, WinLogBeat is just sort of a generic log shipping mechanism from the folks at Elastic. Elastic Stack allows you to ingest data from a bunch of different sources using small clients they call beats, and WinLogBeat is, predictably enough, the one specifically for Windows logs. So if you install that on your Windows subscription server that has all of your collected logs on it, you can ship them off to a database server running the Elastic Stack and analyze them from there. So that's what we're going to be using for our demonstration. And here we go. So what does it actually look like when we take these log files and put them into something like Elasticsearch so we can query them with Kibana for future investigations? Let's take a look. Right here, I've got a Kibana window open looking at a database of events coming from a server named Win2012Web. This right here is one log entry that was pushed into the Elasticsearch cluster via WinLogBeat and then parsed and put into the database. So as you can see, the agent name, that is the name of the server that generated the logs, is Win2012Web. The agent type is WinLogBeat, and there's the agent version. The event log that was put in here is a process create log, meaning a Windows process launched, and this log was written by sysmon. We have an event category, we have an event module. So obviously it's a sysmon log. It's on an x86-64 machine. We have a host IP in Mac and various other pieces of metadata about the host itself. And then here we have the message. This is the regular text that you would see in the event viewer if you were viewing it on the local machine. All of this stuff, because it's pushed in via XML, is then parsed out into individual pieces. So we see the process command line, we see the process executable, we see the parent command line, and so on. All of this stuff is separate pieces of information in the Elasticsearch database, which means we can use any of them as a data point to pivot on or find other information. If I wanted to find everything that had been launched from explorer.exe on this machine, I could take this piece here, process, parent command line, pivot on that, and get back a list of everything that's been done on that workstation. Here we have the original file name, mspaint.exe, the process description, which is just paint, and then the PID, the parent PID, and so on. There is a wealth of information in here. We even have the hashes of the executable, the MD5, SHA-256. So if you need to, you can search for a particular hash across your entire enterprise if you have sysmon installed. Obviously, this gives you a tremendous amount of visibility into the software that's running on your endpoints. So how would we use this in an investigation? Let's start with an alert. Imagine we have a Suricata instance, that is the open source intrusion detection system, running on our network, and it generates this alert, net user command response. That's a standard ET open signature, and what it says is there was network traffic that indicated the results of a net user command. So here's the network data that caused the alert. Somebody posted to a web page called service.php, and part of the response was a list of the user accounts on this Win2012 web server. Administrator, backups, guests, Jimmy, and Teddy. Those are the user accounts that exist on that box. And for some reason, they are going out in response to a post to the web server on that box. Generally, this is indicative of a compromised web server that's running a web shell. That is a piece of software that takes commands from a web client and then relays them to the underlying operating system on the server. So what we want to figure out is what else was done with this web shell and where did it come from? So let's pivot back to our logs here, and we'll do a search for service.php. That was the name of our web shell. Searching for service PHP in the last 24 hours gives us one hit. This one hit appears to be a PowerShell log. To look at the data set here, Windows PowerShell / operational. So this is a PowerShell log that was forwarded from the endpoint that contains that particular file name, service.php. What was the log? It's right here. Invoke web request, this URL, and write it to service.php in our Apache htdocs directory. So it's pulling down the web shell from an outside web server and copying it to our web server so that it can be accessed by a web client. So that's the initial point of entry for the web shell. That's how it was written to the disk. What account did this? Our account here, winlog username, is Jimmy. So a user using the user account Jimmy was able to log into our box and do this. If we filter on that, again, anything that's in these logs that's parsed out can be used as a pivot point. So we'll filter on that, winlog username Jimmy. We remove this service.php. We refresh and we get 28 hits. So that means we have 28 different items from Jimmy. Because we want to look at the PowerShell results, we go down here, we find our script block text, which is right here. We add that column, to our Discover window, and we get a list of everything that was done with this account. Let's sort it by timestamp so it's all in the proper order. So somebody logged in with the Jimmy account. They received the PowerShell prompt. They ran a net user. Again, this is locally on the box. This is not the web shell. They did net user on the box. They ran get service. That lists all the services that are running on the box. They ran get process, which lists all the processes. And then they ran net user /add backups. So what they're doing here is using the command line to add a user named backups to the list of users on the box. They then get a directory listing of the C drive, the directory C/departments. They look at what files are installed in program files and program files x86. They run that invoke web request to write the service.php web shell file into the Apache working directory. And then they attempt to clear the security log and log out. That's the end of the login sessions. So this is our PowerShell logs, and this gives us an exact accounting of every command that was run by this Jimmy account during the PowerShell session. If we want to figure out where Jimmy logged in from, then we need to use the normal Windows event logs, which are also being forwarded into this box. And we do a search for event code 4624, which is successful login, and Jimmy. This is no longer a script block text, so we can get rid of that column. And instead, we can take a look at our login here. So we have a successful logon type 10, username is Jimmy, the source address 138.92.1.100. So it appears that this server has RDP open to the internet. Somebody was able to log into it using Jimmy's account. He probably has a compromised password. And then because Jimmy has administrator access on this box, they were able to use those PowerShell commands to install a web shell. So we know which account was compromised. We know which IP address the commands were coming from. We know everything else that the Jimmy account was used for on this box. The last thing that we need to do is figure out what else the web shell was used for, and then we can wipe it out and remediate. So let's search for net user, because we know that was a command that was run on the box from the web shell. That was our initial alert. We get a bunch of sysmon logs here. See, these are process creates. I'll say, okay, what is the process executable? We'll add that to our list. What is the process parent executable? We'll add that to our list as well. And the reason we want the parent executable is so that we can figure out which commands are being run through the web shell as opposed to which commands are being run locally on the box. If we go back up here, we'll see that the command and net commands are running here, and these are also the parent commands. But this first one is being run through httpd.exe, which, as you probably know, is Apache. So it looks like what's happening here is this net users command that we searched for was initially kicked off by the httpd command, which then launched cmd, which then launched net, which then launched net1. So that's sort of our command execution chain. Stuff coming in from the web shell has at its root the httpd.exe process running as its parent. So what we can do is add that as a filter. We'll say, okay, I want to see anything that has a parent executable of httpd.exe. I'll wipe out my search here, hit enter to refresh, and I'll get a list of everything running as httpd.exe. So that's pretty interesting. The process executable here, we can get rid of that and instead go for process command line. There we go. So now I have a bunch of Apache processes, and here is everything that they launched. So they initially launched Who Am I, which is a very common attacker technique for figuring out what sort of privileges a compromised account might have. In this case, they're checking what privileges the Apache service is running under. Then they ran net user add backups. So this is again adding this backups user. It must not have worked when they did it in PowerShell. Adding this backup user to the administrator's local group. So this is a persistence technique for making sure that they have a secret account, a backdoor account into this machine. Net users, net local group administrators, those are both just read commands, so they're probably checking to make sure that the new account was written. Clearing the event and the event logs for security and application. And then this part is worrisome, getting a directory listing of the HR department, copying everything from that directory into the HTML docs department, and then deleting the Apache logs. So it looks like not only did they create a new backdoor account, but they copied everything out of that HR department directory and exfiltrated it via the web server. So this is time to start your incident response process, figure out what exactly was exfiltrated and what your culpability would be. Again, we're able to pull all of this information strictly out of the logs that were forwarded into our Elasticsearch environment and queried via Kibana. None of this requires any sort of commercial product. This is all free tools that you could set up anytime you like. So that's what this looks like when you actually centralize all your logs and query them using something like Kibana as part of the Elastic Stack. So in summary, centralizing the event logs in your environment can provide tremendous visibility into what's happening on your network. You can see what's going on across your entire fleet of endpoints from one central vantage point, just like that Panopticon photo that we saw at the beginning of the slide deck. As more and more traffic gets encrypted, endpoint logs become more and more important because that's the only place you can see what your computer is doing. Otherwise, it's just a bunch of encrypted traffic moving along port 443. It's very difficult to analyze beyond some metadata stuff like JA3. And finally, if you ship these logs into an Elastic Stack, it makes them much easier to use for an investigation. We were able to track down all the information about that web shell, where it came from, what else it did, what might have been exfiltrated, without ever touching the endpoint itself. It really speeds up investigation and lets you sort of build a workflow around them because you have so much visibility into what's happening on those machines. For more information on this, feel free to follow me on Twitter. I talk about InfoSec stuff an awful lot. Send me an email if you have any specific questions. And I'll be putting this slide deck up on my GitHub site. The URL is right there. I'll also post a link to it on my Twitter. Thanks very much for your time. I hope you enjoyed the talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you. So, what we're going to do, if anyone wants to have a further conversation or want to ask Matt any questions, we are on the PHV-talk-text channel on Discord. That is PHV for Packet Hacking Village talk-text channel on Discord under the Packet Hacking Village. Matt, thank you so much for your talk. So this concludes day one. This concludes day one of Packet Hacking Village Talks. We'll be back tomorrow at 9 o'clock in the morning Pacific time with 4 talks. We have 4 talks. In fact, interestingly enough, we know Matt, your final talk is on Windows logs. And the first talk tomorrow morning will be on, well, event log analysis by the one and only Malware Jake Williams, seeing the forest through the trees. So he'll be starting off tomorrow's day 2 of talks. Then after Jake's talk at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's going to be Unix, Linux, Nix processes, starting, stopping, and everything in between by Nick Roy. The third talk will be by Jared Stroud on Linux binary analysis with strace. And the final talk of tomorrow is going to be on Ars remote code execution via the Meow variant, along with an example 0 day by Akus. I know Akus is physically at DEF CON right now. So If you want, I'm gonna leave the PHV talks text channel open for further questions for the speaker, for Matt. Matt, thank you again, and we will see you tomorrow. We are going to be back tomorrow, 10 o'clock. No, 9 o'clock in the morning. One more thing on a schedule before we close the talks for today. This also will mark the end of the virtual portion of the Packet Hacking Village. Starting at 2 p.m. Pacific time, the Packet Hacking Village will be open physically. That's the physical Packet Hacking Village at DEF CON in Las Vegas, opens up 2 p.m. Pacific time. Nonetheless, as I'm going to stop